Hello, my name is Mark House. I'm the manager at the Krohn Conservatory, where it's always summer. Right here in February, we have a special event going on to show you at home. It's one of my favorite events. It is about chocolate. And we start with this tree. This tree and I have a kinship. I was born in 1967. That's the year this was planted. It was donated by the Hershey's Company. And it's been here at Krohn ever since, and it's been doing well. It produces fruits. In fact, if you look closely, you will see there are flowers on it. And it's a very interesting little plant. It's similar in its flowering structure to our red buds, where the flowers are right on the stems. And it actually produces fruits. And a lot of people are surprised when they see these football-shaped fruits on our tree. And that is where chocolate comes from the seeds. This tree comes from Central America, where there are large plantations. However, it is now grown around the world in equatorial regions because there's a lot of demand for chocolate. It's very popular. The fruit is unexpected, as I mentioned, because it is kind of football shaped. A lot of people look at this and say, oh, I thought it'd be kind of flat and rectangular, but it's not. It is a very interesting fruit, and we're going to show you the process. I'm going to introduce Paul Picton from Maverick Chocolates, who is very rare in his profession. He's a chocolatier who actually makes chocolate from scratch, from bean to bar. He's right here in Cincinnati, local hero. And he actually made chocolate from scratch, from the fruit, right here in Cincinnati, from this tree. It was the only time it had been done in the continental United States.
Well, thank you, Mark. As Mark mentioned, my name is Paul Picton. Along with my wife Marlene, we co-founded Maverick Chocolate here in the city, Cincinnati, about 7 years ago in order to bring a great chocolate here to the city. And one of the things that it makes special of Cincinnati is the fact that we do have a cacao tree right here that we're able to talk about and to refer to. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to harvest the pod, and then we're going to go through the process of how we go from a pod all the way through to finished chocolate bars. So I'm going to reach in and harvest this pod. It's important that we just cut them off carefully. We don't want to damage the tree so that it will be able to grow another pod in the future. So now that we have the pod harvested, now we have to split it open in order to get the seeds out so that we can start to work with them. Cocoa pod has a really thick shell, sort of like a pumpkin or a squash, so we need to use a pretty significant knife to be able to cut it open. Now that we've got the pod open, we want to now be able to get the seeds out so we can see what the seeds are like and what the fruit's like. So sometimes these just slide out, sometimes you've got to cut them out. We don't eat the fruit. The fruit is usually such that it's not something that is easy to take off. You can see it just sort of crumbles off. And what we have left inside, these are the seeds. So the seed is, what you think of as a seed, it's purple when it's fresh like this. It's not something that you can eat. You wouldn't think that this would make good chocolate. Those of you who have had a chance to try the fresh cacao know it tastes very tropical. It's sort of like a papaya, pineapple flavor, and the aroma that I'm getting right now from it cut open is got that same kind of tropical fruit aroma. The part that we see outside of Cincinnati, what's happening down at the farms, has been the harvesting of the pods, then the cutting open of the pods, the scooping out of the seeds of the fruit, going through the fermentation, and going through the drying and the bagging. So what I'm getting them are now set as these dried beans. For us, the first big step once we get the beans is actually to sort them. Because these are a natural product, dried outside, there can be sticks, stones, any kind of foreign material in there. A couple of years ago, my wife found an earring. It was probably from one of the workers who was drying them. And so we hand sort the beans to make sure that there's no foreign matter, no rocks, sticks, stones, anything like that in there. Then the cocoa beans have to be roasted. And roasting is a really critical process to developing the flavor. Cocoa beans are very similar to coffee beans in that when they're raw state, they really don't seem or taste like chocolate. A raw cocoa bean tastes very much earthy, you know, so I eat them raw all the time when I'm sampling them to try them, but they don't really taste like chocolate. It's not something you would think of as being very pleasant until they go through the roaster. So roasting beans said was a critical step. Now that we have the beans, we have to get rid of the shell. So cocoa beans have a thin little shell on the outside of it, and if you crack it, which usually cracks with your fingers, the shell will come right off. And the shell is very thin, a little thinner than a peanut shell, and what you have left is the whole cocoa bean. And so this is now 100% chocolate, if you will. This is the inner part of the cocoa bean without the shell, and this is what we will use to make all of our chocolate. So all chocolate from everybody in the world who makes anything chocolate always starts with cocoa nibs. That is the basis of all things chocolate. The other ingredient that's important is sugar, and because the cocoa nibs themselves are really not the kind of thing that most people want to eat. They can be a little bit bitter, but also they're quite nutty. So it tastes almost to me like a bit of a chocolate walnut. Cocoa nibs are something that are commercially available, and people sprinkle them on smoothies, blend them into granola. We bake with them. Basically any place that a walnut would be called for, you could easily substitute a cocoa nib. And so to make chocolate, what you do is you take the cocoa nibs, you put them into a grinder. We use stone grinders. Same technique that's been used for about 150 years. The stones slowly crush the cocoa nibs, and because the cocoa nibs are about 50% oil, which we call cocoa butter, and 50% solids, which we call cocoa powder, that as they grind, that creates friction, the friction creates heat, and the heat causes the cocoa butter to start to come out from the beans. So after a couple hours in the grinder, you have basically a liquid form. They call it chocolate liquor. It has nothing to do with the alcohol. That's just the description for basically 100% ground cocoa beans. Once the chocolate has been ground and is complete, we actually age chocolate. Chocolate is aged for typically about 30 days, similar way that you would age cheese or things like that. It's just wrapped, put on a shelf, and by doing so helps to really build the flavor that we want. So it takes a little bit of time for the chocolate to sort of settle in until it's ready to basically be molded into bars. And so now that we have finished chocolate, we now want to be able to mold it into something that we can then, serve to customers, that people can carry and take around. And so this is our mold that we use. Different makers have different molds, but they're all roughly the same idea, a polycarbonate plastic mold. And we have a machine at our shop that does the tempering of the chocolate. So chocolate needs to be tempered for it to have its dark color and to have the shine. If you didn't temper chocolate, it would look more like a cocoa powder. It just tends to be tan, it crumbles very easily, it would melt in your fingers. So we temper chocolate, which is a specialized technique for working with it. And then the machine that we do that with also doses it out so we get the correct amount in each mold. Our bars are 65 grams, which is 2.3 ounces. And so we want to make sure that it's all the same, and this machine will dose it. So a blob of chocolate goes into each cavity. We then put it on a vibrating table, which will then make sure that all the corners are filled. It goes into a 20-foot long refrigerator with the conveyor belt. And so it cools for about 20 minutes. And at the end of the 20 minutes, you take the molds out, we tip them upside down, and the bars pop right out. And now we have chocolate bars. So now that the bars are are out and demolded, they then have to be packaged. So we put them into a clear plastic bag, and then they go into the cardboard envelope, and they're now finished and ready to go. And so, you know, once you have the chocolate made into bars, you can now also work with it in a lot of other ways. And so what chocolatiers tend to do is they will take blocks of chocolate and use that to make different confections, pastries, things like that. We use them to make truffles. And so this is an example of some of the different truffles that we make. And we make like 15 different flavors, you know, things like salted caramel, passion fruit, with bourbon, you know, cherry, hazelnut. So there's a lot of things that you can do. And I said, and that's really the what chocolatiers do, is take blocks of chocolate and then, you know, repurpose it in order to make different kinds of confections and whatnot. A lot of the questions that we get are, what's the difference between dark chocolate, milk chocolate, and white chocolate? And so basically dark chocolate contains just cocoa nibs and sugar, whereas milk chocolate will have cocoa nibs, sugar, as well as milk powder. Then if we're going to have white chocolate, we take the cocoa nibs out and we substitute that with cocoa butter. So cocoa butter, milk powder, and sugar makes white chocolate. So today we spend a little bit of time learning how chocolate is made. It's always interesting to know where our food comes from, and it's particularly interesting to be able to come to a place like Krohn Conservatory and see, you know, actual cocoa pods that go on to become chocolate. And there's a lot of steps into making chocolate. It's a lot of fun. You know, I've been making chocolate now with my wife for 7 years, and we really enjoy it. We're always trying new things and new flavors, and you know, so for us, chocolate is a lot of fun. We like the fact that we're able to help different peoples across the world where we buy the beans from, as well as to make great tasting chocolate right here in Cincinnati. So thank you very much. I appreciate the attention, and hope you have some good chocolate.